You think you know evil. You think you've seen the darkest corners of human nature. Let me tell you something. In my 25 years as a detective investigating everything from domestic violence to serial killers, nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. What I'm about to tell you isn't just another true crime story. This is a nightmare that unfolded right before our eyes, a twisted tale of religious fanaticism, murder, and manipulation that still keeps me awake at night. Blonde hair, bright smile, always talking about her faith and her love for her children. A failed author who wrote apocalyptic novels, a man obsessed with near-death experiences and end-times prophecies. This wasn't a sudden snap, a moment of rage, or even a crime of passion. And that's exactly the question that haunted investigators throughout this case. But here's what you need to understand about Lori Vallow. By the time she met Chad Daybell, she was already deep into extremist religious beliefs. She had convinced herself that some people, including her own children, were dark spirits inhabiting human bodies. They fed off each other's delusions, reinforcing their belief that they were chosen ones destined to be together. But there was a problem. They both had spouses and children standing in the way of their perceived divine mission. On July 11, 2019, Lori's brother Alex Cox shot and killed Charles in what he claimed was self-defense. Cox told police that Charles had threatened Lori and attacked him with a baseball bat, leaving him no choice but to shoot. The case was initially closed, but investigators would later realize this was the first domino to fall in a carefully orchestrated plan. In her twisted mind, killing them wasn't murder, it was liberation. This was calculated, premeditated evil disguised as religious devotion. On September 22, 2019, he was seen playing with other children at his new apartment complex in Rexburg. She told schools, family members, and authorities that the children were fine, that JJ was staying with relatives and Tylee was attending college. She maintained this lie for months, all while the children's bodies decomposed in Chad's backyard. Neighbors remembered him as a sweet, energetic boy who loved to run around and play. The next day, JJ would be dead, his small body wrapped in plastic and duct tape, buried in Chad Daybell's backyard like he was nothing more than garbage. These two individuals spent months planning, plotting, and executing a series of murders that would ultimately claim 5 lives, including 2 innocent children. If you're finding this hard to believe, if you're thinking surely no one could be this evil, wait until you hear what happened next. They pressed authorities to perform a welfare check, and when police arrived at Lori's apartment in November 2019, she gave conflicting stories about where JJ was. First, she said he was with a family friend. Then she claimed he was with his grandmother. The stories didn't add up, and police began to suspect something was seriously wrong. But she still had 2 children to deal with. JJ, who was autistic, this move was strategic. It removed them from their familiar environment and support systems while placing them in Chad's territory, where he had influence and connections. Lori told people they were making a fresh start, but investigators would later realize she was positioning the pieces for the final phase of her plan, and required special care, and Tylee, who was becoming increasingly suspicious of her mother's behavior and new relationship with Chad. In what would become a haunting piece of evidence, surveillance footage shows Tylee walking with JJ and Lori's brother Alex Cox. This innocent family outing would be 16-year-old Tylee's last day alive. Think about that for a moment. A teenage girl who should have been worried about school, friends, and her future, instead spending her final hours unknowingly in the company of the people who would end her life, because Charles Vallow's death was just the beginning. Please, do me a favor and hit that like button if you're following along, because what I am about to tell you about JJ and Tylee will show you just how deep this rabbit hole goes. He convinced people he could communicate with the dead, that he had special insight into the spiritual realm. Together, they created a twisted belief system that would justify the unthinkable, the murder of innocent people they claimed were possessed by dark spirits. In 2018, Lori was married to Charles Vallow, a businessman who was growing increasingly concerned about his wife's erratic behavior and obsession with doomsday prophecies. Tammy had no idea that her husband was developing dangerous delusions of grandeur, believing himself to be a prophet chosen to lead the faithful through the end times. She certainly didn't know that he was about to embark on an affair that would cost her life. Charles tried to get help for Lori, even going so far as to tell police that he feared for his life. That fear would prove to be tragically prophetic. She had this way of drawing people in, making them believe she was this devoted mother and spiritual person. But behind that facade was something far more sinister, a woman who believed she was a chosen one in God's plan for the end times, a woman who would stop at nothing to fulfill what she saw as her divine destiny. Picture this. Two innocent children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, disappeared without a trace. Their own mother, Lori Vallow, told people they were visiting relatives, going to school, living their normal lives. If you want to hear more cases like this, if you want to understand how evil can hide behind a smiling face and religious rhetoric, hit that subscribe button right now. I've seen the worst humanity has to offer, but the Daybell case, it challenged everything I thought I knew about human nature. I wasn't directly involved in the investigation, but I followed every detail, studied every piece of evidence, and interviewed colleagues who worked the case. What I'm sharing with you today is the result of countless hours of research, case file analysis, and discussions with law enforcement officials who lived through this nightmare. Trust me, you're going to want to follow this channel because what I am about to reveal will change how you look at people forever. But here's what she didn't tell anyone. Those children were already dead, buried in the backyard of her new husband's property like discarded trash. And that's just the beginning of this horror story. Before we dive into the depths of this investigation, I need you to do something for me. My name is Detective Marcus Thompson, and I've been investigating criminal cases for over 2 decades. Let me start with Lori Vallow herself. If you met her on the street in 2019, you'd probably think she was just another suburban mom. Chad Daybell was her perfect match in madness. But here's what really gets me about this case, and why I want you to pay close attention to every detail I'm about to share. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, how could a mother kill her own children? Let me walk you through how this all started, because understanding the timeline is crucial to grasping the full scope of their crimes. Chad Daybell, meanwhile, was married to Tammy Daybell, a devoted wife and mother who worked as a librarian and school teacher. When Lori and Chad met at a religious conference, it was like 2 dangerous chemicals mixing to create an explosive reaction. The solution, in their twisted minds, was simple: eliminate the obstacles. Charles Vallow was the first to die, and here's where this case gets even more disturbing. After Charles's death, Lori inherited his life insurance policy, giving her access to funds that would support her and Chad's plans. In September 2019, Lori moved the children to Rexburg, Idaho, to be closer to Chad. The last confirmed sighting of Tylee Ryan was on September 8, 2019, at Yellowstone National Park. J.J. Vallow's last confirmed sighting was even more heartbreaking. But here's what makes this case particularly chilling from an investigative standpoint. Lori continued to collect Social Security benefits for both children long after she had killed them. The breakthrough in the case came when JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, became concerned about not hearing from their grandson. By December 2019, the case had exploded into national news. Missing person flyers for JJ and Tylee were everywhere, and law enforcement agencies across multiple states were involved in the search. But Lori and Chad seemed unconcerned by all the attention. In fact, they got married in Hawaii on November 5, 2019, just weeks after Tammy Daybell's sudden and suspicious death. Oh, did I mention Tammy Daybell? Chad's first wife died unexpectedly on October 19, 2019, just 17 days before Chad married Lori. Chad told people that Tammy died peacefully in her sleep, and initially, no autopsy was performed. But when investigators began looking into the timeline of events, they realized that Tammy's death was far too convenient. When her body was finally exhumed and examined, the truth became clear: Tammy Daybell had been murdered. This is the part of the case that really demonstrates the calculated nature of their crimes. Chad and Lori didn't just kill people on impulse. They planned these murders meticulously, timing them to maximize their benefit while minimizing suspicion. They used their religious beliefs as a cover, convincing themselves and others that they were doing God's work by eliminating dark spirits. If you're still with me, if you want to understand how law enforcement finally brought these monsters to justice, make sure you comment below and let me know what aspect of this case shocks you the most. Your engagement helps me know what content resonates with you, and trust me, we're just getting to the most disturbing parts. The investigation into the missing children intensified throughout early 2020. Police were following up on hundreds of tips, conducting searches across multiple states, and building a timeline of Lori and Chad's activities. Meanwhile, the couple seemed to be living their best life in Hawaii, posting photos on social media and acting like they didn't have a care in the world. But law enforcement was closing in. In February 2020, Lori was arrested in Hawaii and charged with desertion and non-support of dependent children. She was extradited to Idaho, where prosecutors hoped she would finally reveal what happened to JJ and Tylee. Instead, she remained silent, refusing to cooperate with investigators or provide any information about her children's whereabouts. The breakthrough came on June 9, 2020, when investigators served a search warrant at Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. What they found there would haunt everyone involved in the case for the rest of their lives. In the backyard, buried in shallow graves, were the remains of JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan. I've seen a lot of crime scenes in my career, but the descriptions of how these children were found still makes my stomach turn. JJ's small body was wrapped in plastic bags and duct tape, his little arms still in the pajamas he was wearing when he died. Tylee's remains were burned and dismembered, scattered across the property like she was nothing more than trash to be disposed of. The discovery of the children's bodies marked a turning point in the case. Suddenly, this wasn't just about missing children anymore. This was a double homicide investigation with multiple victims across several states. The FBI took the lead, coordinating with local law enforcement agencies to build a comprehensive case against both Lori and Chad. As investigators dug deeper into the couple's background and beliefs, a disturbing picture emerged. They had developed an elaborate mythology around the end times, complete with assigned roles for themselves as key players in God's plan. They believed that certain people were light spirits while others were dark spirits that needed to be eliminated for the greater good. According to their belief system, Chad was a prophet who could determine whether someone was light or dark. Lori was his chosen partner, someone with special spiritual gifts who could help identify and eliminate dark spirits. Together, they would help usher in the apocalypse and establish God's kingdom on earth. It sounds insane, right? And that's exactly what their defense attorneys would later argue, that their clients were mentally ill, suffering from delusions that prevented them from understanding the reality of their actions. But here's what I learned from studying this case. Evil often disguises itself as righteousness. These weren't just mentally ill individuals acting on delusions. These were calculating criminals who used religious rhetoric to justify their desire for money, sex, and power. Think about the timeline. Charles Vallow stood in the way of Lori's relationship with Chad, so he was eliminated. Tammy Daybell was an obstacle to Chad's new life with Lori, so she was killed. JJ and Tylee were complications that interfered with the couple's freedom and finances, so they were murdered. Each death served a specific purpose in their plan to be together and live the life they wanted. But investigators were building an airtight case. They had physical evidence, witness testimony, financial records, and most damaging of all, electronic communications between Chad and Lori that revealed their planning and mindset. Text messages showed them discussing their victims as dark spirits and celebrating their deaths as victories in their spiritual war. In May 2021, both Chad and Lori were indicted for the murders of J.J. Vallow, Tylee Ryan, and Tammy Daybell. Lori was also charged in connection with the death of her former husband, Charles Vallow. The evidence against them was overwhelming, but both maintained their innocence, continuing to claim they were being persecuted for their religious beliefs. Lori's trial began in April 2023, and what emerged during testimony was a portrait of a woman who had completely abandoned her maternal instincts in pursuit of her twisted spiritual goals. Witnesses testified about her behavior after the children disappeared. She was happy, carefree, and showed no signs of distress about her missing children. She told people the kids were fine, that they were staying with relatives or at school, all while knowing they were dead and buried. The prosecution presented evidence that Lori had researched how to dispose of bodies, had purchased supplies that were later found at the burial sites, and had continued to collect benefits for the children after their deaths. They showed that her brother Alex Cox, who died under suspicious circumstances in December 2019, had been her primary accomplice in carrying out the murders. And here's something that still bothers me about this case: Alex Cox's convenient death. He died of what was ruled natural causes, but the timing was incredibly suspicious. He died just months after the children's murders, right when law enforcement was closing in on the truth. Some investigators believe he was silenced to prevent him from talking, while others think the stress of what he had done finally caught up with him. The jury in Lori's case didn't take long to reach their verdict. In May 2023, she was found guilty on all counts, 2 counts of first-degree murder for JJ and Tylee, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in Tammy Daybell's death, and grand theft for continuing to collect the children's benefits. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad Daybell's trial began in April 2024, and if anything, the evidence against him was even more damning. Prosecutors showed that he was the mastermind behind the murders, using his claimed spiritual authority to manipulate Lori and justify their crimes. They presented evidence that he had taken out life insurance policies on his victims and had researched burial techniques before the murders occurred. During Chad's trial, new details emerged about the couple's relationship and planning. Text messages showed them discussing their victims' deaths before they occurred, planning their wedding while Tammy's body was still warm, and celebrating what they saw as their spiritual victories. The level of callousness and calculation was staggering. Chad Daybell was sentenced to death by lethal injection in June 2024, making him one of the few people on Idaho's death row. The jury rejected his defense team's arguments about mental illness and manipulation, finding instead that he was the driving force behind the murders and deserved the ultimate punishment. But the story doesn't end there. Lori Vallow Daybell is facing additional charges in Arizona, where she is accused of conspiring to murder her former husband Charles Vallow and attempting to murder her nephew-in-law Brandon Boudreaux. In April 2025, she was convicted of conspiring to murder Charles Vallow and is set for sentencing in July 2025. She has also filed appeals of her Idaho convictions, claiming her rights were violated during the trial process. Her legal team is arguing that she didn't receive adequate representation and that the court made errors that warrant overturning her convictions. But legal experts say her appeals are unlikely to succeed given the overwhelming evidence against her. What makes this case particularly significant is how it exposed the dangers of extremist religious beliefs and the way charismatic individuals can manipulate others into committing horrific acts. Chad Daybell used his claimed spiritual authority to convince multiple people, including Lori and her brother Alex, that murder was justified in service of their higher purpose. The case also highlighted the importance of family members and friends speaking up when they notice concerning behavior. Charles Vallow tried to warn authorities about Lori's increasingly erratic behavior, but his concerns weren't taken seriously enough until it was too late. JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, refused to give up when they couldn't reach their grandson, and their persistence ultimately led to the discovery of the children's bodies. How does a mother become capable of killing her own children? How does religious faith become twisted into justification for murder? While freedom of religion is a fundamental right, at what point do unusual beliefs become dangerous delusions that threaten public safety? How can communities identify and address concerning behavior before it escalates to violence? These are questions that experts are still studying, trying to understand the psychological mechanisms that allowed such horrific crimes to occur. JS grandparents not only lost their beloved grandson, but had to endure months of uncertainty about his fate. But the human cost is immeasurable. 5 people lost their lives, families were destroyed, and communities were traumatized by the revelation of such brutal crimes. Tylee's siblings and other relatives have struggled to understand how their family could have harbored such evil. Tammy Daybell's children lost their mother and then learned that their father was responsible for her death. The delays and bureaucratic obstacles that initially hampered the investigation have led to policy changes and improved protocols for interagency cooperation. JJ and Tylee's deaths, while tragic, may help save other children in the future by improving how these cases are handled. From an investigative standpoint, this case demonstrates the importance of interagency cooperation and following the evidence wherever it leads. The FBI worked with local police departments across multiple states, sharing information and resources to build a comprehensive case. Unlike many criminal cases where there's at least some understandable motive, money, revenge, passion, these killings were driven by delusions and fantasies that existed only in the perpetrator's minds. Jay and Tylee died not because of anything they did, but because their mother decided they were obstacles to her twisted spiritual journey. Digital forensics played a crucial role, with investigators analyzing phone records, text messages, and financial transactions to piece together the timeline of events. The psychological aspects of this case continue to fascinate criminal profilers and forensic psychologists. Chad Daybell remains on death row, though his execution is likely years away given the lengthy appeals process in capital cases. Lori continues to serve her life sentence while fighting her convictions through the appellate courts. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case is how normal Chad and Lori appeared to their communities. They attended church, participated in social activities, and presented themselves as devout, spiritual people. Their neighbors and acquaintances were shocked to learn about their crimes, having seen no warning signs of the evil lurking beneath the surface. This case also raises important questions about the responsibility of religious communities to monitor extremist beliefs among their members. The impact on the victims' extended families has been devastating. The financial cost of investigating and prosecuting this case has been enormous, with multiple jurisdictions spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on searches, forensic analysis, and court proceedings. As I reflect on this case, what strikes me most is the senseless nature of these murders. The case has also had a significant impact on how law enforcement approaches missing persons cases involving children. As of June 2025, the legal proceedings in this case continue to evolve, with appeals and additional trials still pending. The media coverage of this case has been extensive, with documentary films, podcasts, and books examining every aspect of the crimes. While this attention has helped ensure that the victims aren't forgotten, it has also raised concerns about the sensationalization of tragedy, following up on concerning behavior, and never underestimating what people are capable of when they become consumed by extremist beliefs. how charismatic individuals can manipulate others into committing crimes, and how the justice system responds to such complex multi-jurisdictional cases. The convictions of both Chad and Lori represent a victory for justice, but they can never undo the harm that was done or bring back the innocent lives that were lost. It also highlights the crucial role that family members and community members play in protecting vulnerable individuals like JJ and Tylee. The fight for justice never ends, and neither does our obligation to remember the victims and learn from their tragic stories. JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan deserved better from the adults in their lives, but through our continued attention to their case, we can honor their memory and work to prevent such tragedies in the future. But as the children they were, innocent kids who deserved to grow up, to experience life, to make their own choices about their futures. And never assuming that evil can't hide behind a smiling face and religious rhetoric. JJ and Tylee are gone, but their memory can serve as a reminder to all of us to be vigilant, to be caring, and to never forget that our most important responsibility is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Their deaths were senseless and preventable, the result of adults who chose evil over love, delusion over reality. And the impact on surviving family members who are still grieving their losses. For those of us in law enforcement, this case serves as a reminder of the importance of taking all reports seriously. The Daybell case will likely be studied for years to come as an example of how religious extremism can lead to violence. As I conclude this detailed examination of one of the most disturbing cases in recent memory, I want you to remember JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan not as victims. If this case has taught us anything, it's the importance of protecting the vulnerable, speaking up when we see concerning behavior. Remember to subscribe to this channel for more in-depth criminal case analysis. And let me know in the comments what aspects of this case you'd like me to explore further. The fight for justice never ends, and neither does our obligation to remember the victims and learn from their tragic stories. JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan deserved better from the adults in their lives, but through our continued attention to their case, we can honor their memory and work to prevent such tragedies in the future.